right, I will call this evening's regular meeting of the Stoughton Area School District Board of Education to order. Becky, could you please call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Dirks?
Here.
Mr. Bougon?
Here.
Mr. Coughlin?
Here.
Mr. Fry?
Here.
Ms. Fitzgibbon? Here. Mr. Jackson?
Here.
Ms. Robb?
Here.
Ms. Sword?
Here.
Ms. Tarpinian?
Here.
Thank you. Is there anybody here out of the 6 of you that would like to address the board during the public comment period? Not seeing any takers. Okay. Legislative update, please, Donna.
Well, I was hoping I had the radio tuned as I was driving home from work, and it sounds like there's no news yet. But I did provide you with a document. Hopefully this is a little more user-friendly, and it's got links to those sources, but essentially we don't have a budget. We're one of 3 states in the nation that have yet to pass a budget. And I think you can just kind of go, if you're listening to the news, you probably already know a lot of these things. So I won't spend a lot of time, but the other thing that I just want to make sure you all got your email from the Wisconsin Public Education Network. They're running a thing. I've gone to those in the past, and you know, they're kind of hit and miss, but if you've got the day to give up, it's, you know, $25, it's not much, and nice to network with other school folks, so I would encourage you to attend.
And we can still register. I don't see a deadline, but I obviously they have to plan for lunch, so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And it's all day?
It's like one of those, you know, kind of like 8 to 3 things. I mean, you can go for whatever portion you want to go as well. The one interesting thing that will be is that Tony Evers is doing the kind of the beginning address, and now he's filed papers to run for governor, so it'll be interesting if he says something about it, or if there's a lot of press there thinking that he might be talking about it.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
Any other questions about that? Okay, thank you. District Administrator report.
Thanks, Scott. This is the time of year that we start gearing up again, and we start going full bore for the start of the new school year. And so just want to throw out to you some dates and things that are happening and coming up. So last week was band camp. For those of you that are familiar with band camp, that's when our high school band and the marching component in particular start their halftime show and their marching routines, and they spend a week learning learning the music and learning the routines and learning the steps, etc. But that was all of last week. This Sunday, July 30th, is our fall sports meeting. Next Monday, July 31st, football practice begins. August 7th, golf practice begins. August 8th, swim and tennis practice begins. August 14th, cross-country volleyball and soccer practice begins. On August 7th, 9th, 21st, 23rd, and 25th, students will be building electric guitars and amplifiers in the Fab Lab as part of it. And last year they did electric guitars, and I think we had one of them come and demonstrate. This year they've added the amplifiers. So they're building the electric guitars and the amplifiers. August 17th, central registration takes place at the high school from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. August 22nd is the second day of central registration for the district at the high school from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. We tried to stagger the times to hit different times for families, whether they could come early in the morning, lunchtime, after work, etc. August 29th, 30th, and 31st, staff report for in-service prior to the start of school. And August 29th, we will be doing ALICE training with our staff. August 30th, we have an open house at Fox, Sandhill, and Kaganza from 4:30 to 6 p.m. And also on August 30th, River Bluff open house is from 5:30 to 7. September 1st is the first home football game, and the board traditionally takes tickets during that. So if you are interested in being part of that game and taking tickets, please let Becky Egan know as soon as you can so we can plan of how many people we have and if we need other people to help take tickets. But that's September 1st. Usually it's a 5:30, I believe, time where we ask the board to be there. That's Friday, September 1st. Tuesday, September 5th is the first day of school for the 17-18 school year, the Tuesday after Labor Day. Friday, September 8th is the second annual Staff Appreciation Tailgate from 4:30 to 7 prior to the football game and recognition during halftime. This is something we started last year where we've invited all staff and their families, and I'd like to personally invite all of you and your families to come to a tailgate party before that home football game. Administration, we will be serving, and then we will be recognizing staff that have stuck around at halftime, asking them and their families to come out on the track for a round of applause by the community. Last year was really well received, and it's a chance to recognize the staff and kick off the year with a staff recognition and celebration. And that is Friday, September 8th, again, second annual. We're hoping this is an annual event. And then the last thing I have is students have already begun working on this year's musical, which will be Bye Bye Birdie, which will be performed sometime in October. I believe it's October 20th, 21st, and 22nd, I believe is the tentative date. So we are kicking off full blast once August hits of the next school year.
Right, thank you. Questions about any of that? Joe?
Yeah, you mentioned one day for Alice training. What's that going to look like, and how many days total is that going to take?
Alice training's a morning. So we will have all staff at their buildings roughly 3.5 hours. There will be we said staff to be trainers, so there'll be trainers. Law enforcement will be in and out helping out with that as well. We take staff through several different scenarios, from what we currently do to lockdown and barricade to all the different steps of Alice. It's very powerful. Administration and most of the year-round employees have gone through that in June. So that will be prior to the school starting. And then we have a group that is made up of educators that's currently talking about what does that look like for drills and conversations with students, age appropriate, grade appropriate, because obviously the conversation you have with a kindergarten student is different than you have with a 12th grader.
And they will effectively be trained at that point?
Yes.
Okay.
Along those lines, is it anticipated that there's going to be like an update sort of training or something every year? Because obviously we'll have new staff.
Right. We're planning to do update, training, especially the new staff every year, and build that in as part of our new teacher or new staff in service. I shouldn't just say teacher, it's all new staff. So it's conversations, and Cal and Erica in particular are spearheading that and are working through all those different scenarios and all those different plans for all of those things.
Okay, thank you. Further questions, Joe?
Yeah, I guess along those lines, when will the sort of training of the students take place? Is that just to be determined?
Yeah, to be determined. Really we're working with some staff members to identify what is the education that needs to happen first. The training process really is kind of a process. It's not, here's the thing, you learn it and then you're done. It's really about educating people about options that will increase survivability in various situations. And like Tim said, what that looks like for an elementary student is going to be different than a high school student. So it's not just a matter of doing a drill, it's all the education pieces that lead up to it. And what that drill looks like could be very different, not only between buildings, but from one point in time to another point in time. So most districts have really kind of worked over a period of time to educate, help kids understand, teach them options, and then incorporate it into their ongoing safety drills.
Thank you. Steve?
Just like to suggest on that training that, once again, I mentioned this once before about the 4K program, and I understand that the district doesn't consider the 4K program truly part of the district, but you have staff that are in those buildings on a regular basis. So I would just offer up that you might give some consideration to that.
Okay, thank you. Yoli?
So the 4K program, the staff that is there, they're not trained on that because the schools or the site where they are do that, or what?
Right now, they're not, our 4K staff are not district employees. We have community-based. And so some of the problems we run into, depending on the site, is they have different beliefs or security measures, et cetera. So those are ongoing conversations. So, for example, last spring, if you remember, we were on a soft lockdown type of thing. We had at least one 4K site who said, no, we're not locking our doors. You know, some of our 4K sites are churches, and they're saying, we're open to everybody. And so that was the site determination, because they have the flexibility at the site for some of those things. But it is, you know, we are talking, and we talk every year about ongoing training and ongoing in-services that we do provide for our 4K facilitators. And we have staff, and we've done training with, some of our staff have gone down there and trained on educational issues and things like that. So it's an ongoing conversation as far as training and what do we work with, or how do we work with the 4K sites. Yep.
The other piece that I wanted to add is we'd have to kind of explore what that could look like, because I'm one of our certified ALICE trainers. I cannot train anyone outside of people that are employed by the Stoughton Area School District. I know that police officers that are trained in ALICE training have a different standard, but for those of us that, like me or Aaron Conrad or Brian Shim and some of the other administrators that have been trained, we're not allowed to train people outside of our organization that, or the people that we have employed here. So so again, looking at what that could look like at a 4K site would just need to look a little bit different than what we're doing here internally in the district. So, but like Tim said, the ongoing training requirements in those sites is certainly something we can talk about. It just might look a little different.
Anything further on that? Okay, thank you, Tim. Consent agenda. Yoli?
So, move approval of the June 26th, 2017 regular meeting minutes. Move approval of the June 22nd, August 15th, 2017 check register as presented. We would like to say thank you to the following individuals and groups and move approval of their donations to the district. $15,572 from the Stoughton Sports Boosters for a gym lift system, weight room equipment. $6,281.27 from the Stoughton Sports Boosters for dance mirrors, volleyball pads, nets, soccer shelter cover, and a tennis ball cart. $6,000 from the Cole Education for innovation supply for science and other curricular areas at Fort Prairie. $5,200 from Stoughton Football Inc. for football pants. $2,023.45 from Fox Prairie Working for Kids, rates from Fun Run for Technology for Fox Prairie supplies. $2,000 from the UPS store for the Summer Excel book giveaway to students. $1,200 from the Stoughton High School Band Booster for 2017-18 field shows and pep band music. $475 from the Stoughton Viking Wrestling Club for entry fee for Rumble on the Red event. $350 from Fox Prairie Working for Kids for any bullying assembly. $100 from National FFA Organization for FFA supplies. $50 from Kigansa Working for Kids for third grade field trip costs. Stuffed animals value at $50 from St. Vincent de Paul Society for Some Excel fourth grade carnival class. Supplies valued at $15 from Dollar General for summer sale for fourth grade carnival class. And related budget adjustment for $40,243.72. For approval of professional educator resignations. of Catherine Varda, effective at the end of the 2016-2017 school year. Move approval of an administrator contract for Elizabeth Brody. And move approval of permanent professional educator contract for Rebecca Bell, Melinda Dozoy, Ann Fembright, Kaylee Hickey, Stephanie Josart, Catherine McGee, Kathleen Maloney, Samuel Raff, Patricia Wilton, and Tess Webb for the 2017-18 school year.
The consent agenda has been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the approval of the consent agenda? Seeing none, all in favor of approving the consent agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? And that is accepted. We have several discussion items tonight. The first of which is an overview of the grading process, looking at our current process. Board members, you may remember that several months ago, we had a discussion regarding grading, and we had asked Judy to come back sometime over the summer to discuss it further, and the board may decide, based on the information we get, to explore possible changes. So, take it away, Judy.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to start out with a little bit of history, not a long history. Long ago, when school started and we did testing, it was primarily for sorting students, sorting for social and financial groups. And that was an important thing. Many of our tests came following that out of a military need to sort soldiers. Our mission today is very different than that. We don't sort our kids for what kind of next learning they can have or what kind of post-secondary opportunities they can have. It's our job to provide a solid education to all of our students. And so our grading practices have changed as a result of that. Just as a little FYI, Stoughton is involved in kind of a think and book study with several other districts in the area who are working on making sure that there's equity in the decisions we make about both grading and course design. And so I think it's important to know that there's lots of people out there, and we're all kind of working and studying on that. The book that we're reading right now is Despite Our Best Intentions, and it talks about how schools without intention have an influential bias in the success for some students. So we're addressing even in our beginning efforts at grading practices, we were really looking at the equity issues we have in our grading practices. When we first started out in 2010-ish, probably even a little earlier than that, not all of our students had the same access to rigorous curriculum. Not all students had the same access to changing their grades, and literally, like, they didn't erase them, but they could go and pursue a teacher and say, can I just do one more little thing and make this B plus and A minus? And as odd as that sounds, it was not an uncommon practice, not just here, but not an uncommon practice in our sorting kind of days. At the time, we had attendance and behavior woven into academic grades, and so if you were there every day, that helped to boost your grade. If you were a well-behaved student, that also helped to boost your grade. Learning targets weren't consistently defined, and we make reference to our learning targets all the time now. So it's both for the classroom teachers to make sure that they're on the right path, and for the students so they know what it is they're supposed to be learning in class. Communication with families and transcripts really misrepresented student proficiency because there were so many things mixed into a grade. Attendance, behavior, extra credit. So you couldn't really tell if the student was really successful in math or they were partially successful in math and there were other things, other influences happening to that grade. And then our grading habits, that was implemented inequitably. Our teachers interpreted our grading practices differently. So in about 2010, that was probably our last significant revision to grading practice. And we made some decisions then. Those of you that have been watching school board meetings since then probably remember. We had a lot of community involvement in conversations about these kinds of changes because they really did change the way we did business. One of them was eliminating grading on a curve. That is, X number of people would get an A, X number of people could get a B, X number of people could get a C, and so on down the way. If all of our students achieve the learning targets, they may all have an A. That is very infrequent, but the learning targets, the learning targets establish what it is we want kids to know and be able to do, not a learning curve that says only 10% or 20% of our kids can earn an A. We eliminated extra credit. It tended to be non-academic and it led to some inequity. At elementary school, you could get extra credit for bringing in Kleenex because we were running low on that. You may experience some of that. And so our staff is very confident now that extra credit really does try to kind of shade what is really, what we really know and are able to do, to the point where they were receiving training last week and the trainer said, and if you want to put extra credit in your grade book, and all of our teachers went, oh no. So I was really quite proud of them. We studied the implications of averaging unrelated grades, especially with a 0. In a grading scale, in a 100-point grading scale, the difference between an A and a B is 10 points. The difference between a B and a C is 10 points. The difference between a C and a D. And then we get to 60, and the difference between a D and a 0 is 60 points. And so by averaging a 0 into grades that are range only, I'm seeing some frowns. So if I have 100 to 90 is a 10-point difference between an A and a B, and an 89 to an 80 is a 9-point difference. Okay, so those are all 10-point differences. We get down to a 50 to a 59, but it's really 0 could have been a 35. I mean, literally a 0 for not turning something in, for instance. To average a 0 into those other grades made your average almost unrecoverable. Where it would have been one assignment, good day, bad day, for whatever reason, it's had a huge influence on what your grade was. And so a 0 also doesn't necessarily represent what the kids know and are able to do. It just says that I don't know what you know and are able to do. And so we really emphasize it's important to find out what the child knows and is able to do and include that as part of their grade. We studied terms that you've probably heard if you have children in our schools: formative and summative assessment. Formative assessment really represents practice opportunities, practices in any of the disciplines where teachers are giving feedback, and it does not carry a heavy weight in the grade book. A summative is really the end of the learning after all of those practices and all of that feedback for improvement, and what do we know now at the end of this learning cycle? And that grade does carry more weight. At the time that we made that change, we also incorporated retake options for summative assessments. They carried more weight. If it was a bad day, you may have needed the opportunity to try that again. And so we have built that in. And we had to also define the frequency of feedback information into Infinite Campus, our student information system, so that you should routinely find new, fresh information from your children's teachers at least every 8 school days, so that we don't go for too long a period of time without knowing what's going on there. River Bluff and Stoughton High School maintain grading guidelines, which they literally look at annually. Sometimes we think that there is a system that's going to work and help encourage children to do their best, and we find that the children have outthought us. And so sometimes we have to revise the grading guidelines because they have come up with something we didn't anticipate. So those are reviewed and shared and available digitally, and probably in hard copy too. So that's where we have been. One of the things that we're looking at this summer actually is, do those grading practices negatively influence where we want to go with our students in their learning environments and as they practice taking more responsibility for their own learning? And there's a little bit of concern, I think, on the teacher's part that maybe our grading practices or our testing practices are almost a barrier to our allowing students to take a little more responsibility for their learning. So that's a thing that we need to take a look at. So I have 3 topics that I am aware of that I think we need to pursue in our next iteration of studying grading practices. And then I have a slide that I'll open up to you. The first one, what grading practices, I guess I sort of talked about this, what grading practices serve as barriers to a more student-centered learning experience or to a place where the students can own their own learning? And then what post-secondary grading practices do we want to emulate at the high school, or do we really want to stay away from? And it's time to rethink about our common assessments, retakes, how much time do you have before you know, to retake an exam. Final exams altogether, is a cumulative final exam a good use of our time. Formative is practice and summative is end of learning. So those are all kind of wrapped into one of our topics for study to make sure that our own plans aren't standing in our way to move forward. The second one is really represents the study that we're participating in, or I'm participating in with other districts in Dane County. And that is how are equity and social justice represented in our grading practices? Are there biases? Are there things that we have not anticipated that are woven deeply into our grading practices or our testing practices that we're not aware of, and we need to lift that up and really wrestle with it and say, are we really being fair to all of our learners? And that is how implicit bias in grading may influence the achievement gaps that we're really trying to close. When we get our testing data back and we have gaps that must be closed, is it something that we're not doing intentionally or overtly or obviously trying to create gaps, but are we doing things that may in fact influence the gaps that we're trying to close? And then finally, the one that I think that you're interested in is a 4-point grading scale. Currently, our transcript represents the rigor of course selection at our high school and the courses that our students have taken. And we use a 4-point grading scale. That is, a 4 is an A, 3 of those points is a B, 2, C, 1, D. And what our question then is, what about a 5-point scale? Should we have a 5-point scale for some of our courses? Should we offer a 5-point scale for courses that are offered at the university, or university courses even that are offered in our campus? and what courses should earn, should be eligible for a 5-point scale if that's something that in our study turns out isn't an inequitable opportunity for all. A concern that has jumped out at us right away is, does a 5-point on some of our courses diminish the value of a 4-point course that's sitting right next to it in the course selection guidebook? And then who should determine what value, what courses or what institutions can have 5 points on a grading scale? I should back up a little and say on a 5-point scale, a 5 would be worth an A, or an A would be worth 5 points. A B would be worth 4 points. So on a 5-point scale, you could earn a B and still maintain a 4-point average in our on our transcripts. I would like to share this link that I have. It's about 5 minutes long, but honestly, there's nothing I can say that will be as eloquent as the young man that speaks in this. I do have an opinion on this, and so you know that. And I think the research that we look at tends to have an opinion, but they're just researchers. And so this is the speech from a young man who is doing his graduation speech. Do you see that? How do I make it full screen?
I'm speaking into a microphone. I'm speaking into a microphone at graduation. No matter how many details I give, I will never be able to express the full truth about today, about this experience, about high school. Nevertheless, I would like to describe to you as honestly as I can how it is I came to represent our graduating class on this occasion as its valedictorian. As much as I would like to say that I was chosen because of my hard work, dedication, and intellect, I would be far from truthful in doing so, as I have met and studied alongside individuals more diligent and talented than myself in the past 4 years. 4.63. This 3-digit number is the reason I stand before you today. But what does it really mean? My GPA is just an artificial number meant to measure my academic prowess, as determined by what grades I earned and what classes I took. However, GPA among students equally able to earn A grades in all of their courses is dependent solely upon the number of weighted courses versus the number of unweighted courses the student took, not accounting for extracurricular involvement, social awareness, or even how much was learned. The system, imposed upon us by tradition, has separated true education from academic achievement, where one can now be accomplished without the other. High school academics are a game that the players must learn to beat in order to climb the leaderboards of class rank. The most successful players, as dictated by our ranks, learn the ways in and around the system and choose their courses accordingly. GPA has become like currency in a game of Monopoly, in which the players who chance upon the right tiles or construct the right schedules earn more, while others inevitably end up with less. No matter what, someone wins the game while the rest stand defeated. School has instilled the same spirit of competition within its participants, diminishing its original purpose, to educate citizens for the future. While the competitive top-tier students glance at their transcript and wish for a higher GPA, a better class rank, those students ranked at the bottom are left with little to no motivation to succeed academically and with a sense of defeat. These points bring me back to my original question of why it is I who was chosen to represent you on this occasion. I climbed the ladder of class rank to the top because I failed to participate in activities such as athletics, band, speech and debate, and journalism that ironically would have decreased my GPA, while I watched my peers become involved and accomplished and improve as human beings. It is for this reason I confess that I don't believe I am qualified to represent my graduating class. I have not had the opportunity to talk to or even meet a majority of the graduates here today. The student who ends up with the highest GPA is the one glorified under the name valedictorian and chosen to represent the class, when in reality, grades have little to do with one's knowledge of his or her classmates. In attaining a high GPA, I tended towards social isolation. The sole responsibility responsibility of the valedictorian and the salutatorian is to deliver a speech representative of the graduating class, a task that hardly coincides with the selection criterion of GPA. Students in other prestigious positions, such as editors of the Gazette, officers in band, and captains in speech and debate and athletics, hold far more demanding responsibilities that require them to not only work with their peers, but to guide them towards greater goals and achievements, a task that more closely necessitates knowing one's peers. In fact, I know that my efforts and progress in P Club and in piano will be the experiences I remember in years to come, rather than the struggle for a 90% in every meticulously selected weighted course. I'm confident that our class will move forward to tremendous successes in the future, not as a result of our experience striving for straight A's, but because of the lessons learned and memories made working with fellow students and staff, not to mention our upper and middle class background in a society with limited economic mobility. Nevertheless, graduates of Granite Bay High School have exceptionally bright futures ahead, which will shine in a predominantly dark and cruel world. Education is the passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it today. Malcolm X. So graduates, let us be thankful for the extraordinary educational opportunities we have had these past 4 years, and let us continue to work to prepare for an even brighter tomorrow. Thank you all for your time and attention, and congratulations again to all graduates of the class of 2016.
And so I offer to you any other topics or comments on the topics that we've already noted that deserve study.
So questions, John?
Yeah, can you explain a little bit more about the topic number 2, equity and social justice represented in our grading practices, and the study on implicit bias and its influence on the achievement gaps?
There's a good amount of research about students, and this young man addressed it briefly, students that struggle early, struggle in kindergarten, are a little bit behind their kindergarten peers and go on to first grade. And when you are a little bit behind in first grade, then there might be additional services that either require you to leave the group a little bit to learn what you have missed, or have a special service outside of the classroom. That becomes, it increases over time, so that students who are, they might have a disability, a reading disability, not a thinking disability, which is an important distinction in a learning disability. Typically, learning disabilities would be reading, writing, potentially math, but typically not a thinking disability. And so if you're dependent on only a written response in an assessment or a demonstration of learning, that student is at a disadvantage, not because they don't know the essential learning targets, but because they have a barrier they have to jump over to be able to demonstrate that. Of course, to students who don't have continuous learning opportunities, so they may move more often, or have struggled with attendance, for instance. Those kinds of things aren't an indicator of what they know and are able to do, but are an indicator of barriers that they've had to overcome, and may well have some stamina characteristics that the students that benefited from coming to school every day didn't have to even learn. Mm-hmm. So those are like some that jump out at me, but yeah. There are several that we're diving into a little bit that are a little bit more painful than that I have to, it's a lot of self-reflection.
So, yeah, can you explain to me specifically how Stoughton School District is investigating these?
We do routinely do book studies or thought studies, where we come together and have done some reading together and then wrestle with the idea. Those ideas and how we wrestle with them influence the annual update of grading practices, and are we doing something that advantages one child over another who seem to be in the same position that need, for instance, to retake a test or to access help from a teacher prior to retaking a test. And so oftentimes it's students that help us not, I mean, they're not intentionally saying, that's not fair to me, but they're ideas where they would challenge the status quo and we would have to say, we need to take that back and think about the implications for that.
So are there any, is the district, I'm sure that we have all sorts of performance data or ways that we assess our schools and how well we're educating our kids. Are we sorting that data in any way that you would be able to present it to the board in terms of equity or through the lens of equity and social justice or implicit bias or these achievement gaps? That sounds like something that we could put a metric to. Are there any metrics that we have?
Annually, we present the state testing, which that is all disaggregated. We disaggregate our local triennial assessments. And at a local level, at a school level, they are very capable of disaggregating, you know, their classroom and their local data. And we do that. And we know there is a gap. And we continue to work to overcome that. We haven't cured it yet. But yes, when we bring the data from the most recent tests, or you know, I can bring data from grading, you know, end of course grades, and have that disaggregated as well. If you're interested in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Building on that, I guess my question would be then, how do we balance that against high expectations and just expecting our students to do better and, you know, to model that? Maybe you have to think more about the actual problem, but it seems to me, I mean, like, let's say in the terms of race, I mean, there was just something in the paper last week about Madison School District and the number of teachers of color versus the student body. So, I mean, this kind of goes along with that, I would think, because that they do better because a teacher that mirrors their ethnicities would expect more.
Right. There are, and that isn't a thing that you would even think would influence the grading practices or the learning opportunities of students, and yet there's a research base. And Madison is very much leading the way in that, as is Milwaukee, that are doing a lot of research on those topics. Those are some topics. Some things feel a little more out of reach to us than things that we can, that we should be monitoring close by. But it isn't that we don't constantly try to influence our educator base or our employee base to reflect, better reflect our population as well.
Other questions, Yoli?
It's along with what Donna was saying, because I think grade or how we grade our students cannot be, we cannot lower expectations for anyone, but we have to take into account what are the practices that we have, what are the opportunities for all the students, because like you said, if there is a child that is, you know, behind for whatever reason, that is beyond, like you said, it's not like he cannot do it, he just doesn't have the opportunity. And so, but that gotta be really difficult, but there might be some places where we can take examples from that, you know, along you grade the students, but also you're not comparing apples to peers. You are comparing what are their abilities to do something, rather than just grading all of them the same way. So I don't know, I'm not an expertise in that area, but I'm just thinking that we gotta do something about that.
And we know that one of the approaches is to engage the children more in, here's what the data, your data says about you, how does, you know, what let's talk about that. What do we need to do with it so that the students can own that a little more rather than it just being for a teacher and a parent. Those people are also the audience, but that the student can help own that. We know that that makes an influence on the effort or the support or help the student seeks. We no longer have leveled classes. We have AP classes available, but we don't have accelerated biology and regular biology. That was very evident in our enrollment, that there was inequity in who was allowed to take regular biology, who was recommended to take accelerated biology. And so those courses don't exist anymore. And to both of your points about having high standards, we use the standards and the essential learning targets of the accelerated biology course. And within that, you know, we've been working for a long time on making sure that we're differentiating to help students that, you know, whatever the struggle is to achieve those high standards. So we haven't lowered the standards, but we no longer allow children to choose an easier course.
Sarah?
I have two questions. I'd like to know more about the retake option. Is that for, where does that start? What grade?
6th grade.
And you can do?
At the middle school. If they are not satisfied with the grade or they think it doesn't reflect what they really know and are able to do, they have 5 days from the time they got the test back, and they are expected to do some additional practice or meet with the teacher, for sure meet with the teacher, to see what it is that they didn't understand or misrepresented on the test. And then within 5 days, they need to retake the test, and that becomes their new grade. It's not averaged with the old grade. It becomes...
They can do that in high school as well?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It just seems a little problematic if we're preparing them for real life. You know, if one of our kids is a heart surgeon, we can't redo that heart valve. You know, say, oops, sorry, it was a bad day, you know. So I'm a little critical of
and that's very fair. We've had students that were critical of it. We still have teachers that are critical of it. One of the things that we had to change in that practice was students will outthink us on every guideline we come up with. They were very clever. They would come to class unprepared, take a look at, preview the whole test, and then elect to retake it. So I can't tell you the details of the high school guidelines right now, but they have there's a little tweak to it that doesn't allow that. If it turns out that that's a practice that really is undermining or is not representing what we want students to be prepared for, I think it's a thing that we need to look at and say, okay, we're taking that out now.
We're trying to balance, you know, and Sarah, your example of a heart surgeon is, you know, you're doing heart surgery and you don't get to, oh, so I made a mistake, redo. But I also, you know, when talking to my brother-in-law, who talks about, you know, and we had this conversation, he had the same type of concerns, and I said, well, in your division, if you have one of the people in your division do a report, and they hand in the report to you, and it doesn't meet your expectations, do you just accept it and move on and say, okay, I'm going on? He goes, no, I give it back to them, I give them feedback, and they need to redo it up to their standard. And so we're trying to balance that with, you know, the summative of these are the standards, and you didn't meet the standards, you should redo it, and the end product is what we're going after. So we're trying, not that it's perfect and not that, you know, we have all the answers, but that's what we're trying to balance that. What's our expectation, and your expectation is for this end product. And so sometimes you may be able to do that standard right away, but if you can't, you should be given some feedback and allowed to then bring it up to that standard and meet that standard. So
we have some families that say, my kid's not retaking a test. It's not okay with me, I don't believe in that, and they just don't.
Tim? Yeah, just a couple thoughts. I think from my experience and what I've seen so far, it seems like you're on the right track. I think what Tim is referring to, I refer to as competency-based learning, which is you're going to get this whether you like it or not. You know, this is a report. And I think the one thing I do want to echo, I think Donna Ioli mentioned it too, is that balancing of high expectations. And I would almost use the term reciprocal accountability. I remember when I was in high school, I was struggling in algebra. My dad was a math teacher, former math teacher, and he didn't find out I was struggling until the end of the quarter. I got my grade. And there wasn't this finger pointing at the teacher. I didn't know this was going to happen. It was what I need to do to help my son get better. And I think that I'm always very cautious of that we are preparing these kids for things later in life, and they're not. And as a wife that has a professor, that is a professor that works with graduate students, their parents aren't there to always bail them out, for lack of a better word. And so I think we have to always remember there has to be reciprocal accountability. It can't all fall on the school or the teacher to make sure that the student gets it. I think that we do have that obligation, but we also have to make sure that that balance of high expectations is there, and that we have a certain expectation of others involved in these kids' lives to make sure that they're doing their part to make sure that they're successful.
I think Scott and I are actually pretty well positioned to talk about this because our kids were in high school when the retake went into effect, and are now, my two are graduated. I think it set them up for issues in college. My daughter was at UW-Madison. They don't care. You take the test, you failed, you're done. She's just a hard worker and trudged through. But a lot of kids that I know personally had felt defeated and quit, or else moved to different schools. And that is not what we want to have happen. On the other end of it, my son just graduated from Lake College. He said, they were too easy on me. They let me get away with stuff, and I just feel I'm unprepared for life right now. I mean, it's that you kind of have to learn. You have to make mistakes in order to learn. I completely understand that you're really wanting to test their knowledge, but maybe it's something that you could, we could phase in. You start retakes when they're young and you're kind of learning, but then as you get closer and closer to college, you kind of have to phase that out and realize this is what you're going to be faced with in college. I mean, I think we regularly talk to college freshmen the year after they graduate, and I'm pretty sure I heard they were not for the retakes. They said, stop doing retakes because it's hurting us. So that's just something,
It'd be a good part of a study to actually do the survey of college grads. I mean, we involve parents in this, of course, when we first started it, but to have a parent voice in whether or not a retake is sound.
I mean, I think we've all been there where it was a bad day and you really wanted that opportunity. I don't want to take us off if other people have questions regarding that specific thing, but I just wanted to get these points out before they get lost. I think that if we are going to do any sort of changing with our grades, we have to look at our scholarship guidelines then, because scholarships are only rewarded on your ranking. Well, not only, but I mean, that is the big part of it. And so, if we're saying that grades might not be as important, then I think we need to relook at the scholarship guidelines to make sure that they align, because that's, I know that when that speech you showed us, I thought immediately of a student who was involved in everything in high school. She missed the mark on the scholarship, didn't get called in for a scholarship at Stoughton, and that girl is tremendously successful right now. And I wonder, we're missing something there. And then I guess the only other thing I wanted to make sure we talk about is engagement versus rigor, and maybe versus the accountability that Tim was talking about. I don't want it to be so rigorous that some kids become disengaged and don't want to learn, but it is a balance. And I mean, we aren't experts. We're relying on you, but it's certainly something that I think those of us with recent graduates, both at high school and college, really can see the effects of.
Yeah, I'll echo some of that. First of all, let me say that I appreciate you taking the time to walk us through this. I think it's especially important for the board members, which I think is now a majority, who haven't yet had kids at our high school, which is where a lot of what you're talking about really takes place. It's important for them to know where we came from and where we're going. And I also want to say that I appreciate that it's really difficult to find that balance between, you know, what do we want grades to be for versus what does the rest of the world outside the Stoughton area school district want grades to be for. And I think that's kind of what Donna was getting at. You know, maybe in an ideal world, we don't even do grades. We just measure how far kids have progressed, how much they've learned, and figure out how much further they have to go before they've reached mastery of whatever it is they're learning. But as you get closer and closer to graduation from high school, that's less and less practical because of what the outside world wants. And I also appreciate that we have to teach every kid that lives in our district. And while most of our students, when they graduate, will go on to secondary education, and most of those will go right away into college or two-year college, we do have a lot who don't and won't, at least not right away, and that's okay. But we have to address that entire spectrum. What I do worry about with, for example, with the retake policy is it's not good preparation for college. And I've got one son who graduated from University of Minnesota this last May in their College of Science and Engineering. I got another son who just finished his freshman year at UW-Milwaukee in civil engineering. Both of them did very well at Stoughton High School. But both of them said exactly that. It really was not good preparation for college. You do occasionally run into the professor who will say, hey, I get it, everybody has a bad day now and then, I'll work out a little bit of an accommodation, but that's unusual. Maybe what we do is we allow retakes starting in 6th grade and then phase them out by the end of 10th grade, just as an example.
That's a good idea.
Because I really think that you've got to teach, I get what you're saying, Tim, you know, in certain parts of the outside world, after education, you know, you do something poorly or not up to your boss's expectations, and he says, well, okay, here's some feedback, give it another shot. College isn't like that, though. Not typically, anyway. The other thing that I think we really need to, and I don't know that the board necessarily needs to do this, but going to your topic number 3, I don't know exactly what the answer is, but I do think we have to address kind of the converse of what the student was talking about in his address. We sure don't want to turn out students who graduate from our district who, solely for the purpose of getting the highest rank in their class, don't do extracurriculars, don't have a social life or anything like that, because high school is about a lot more than just getting good grades. At the same time, I don't think that we want to penalize the student who decides to stretch out, to really push the outside of their own envelope by taking a dual credit class or taking 3 AP classes their senior year instead of 1 or something like that. And then suffering in the grade point department as a result. You know, maybe if they take classes outside of the Stoughton High School, it just doesn't enter into their grade point average, for example. maybe AP classes shouldn't necessarily be on a 5-point scale, but maybe they are more than 1 credit classes. Maybe they're a credit and a quarter, or I don't know. But I do think that we have to try to develop a policy that encourages students at the high school to extend themselves as far as they can. And we certainly don't want to have policies that discourage them from doing that, which I'm afraid we are doing right now. Especially like Donna said, if how you do grade-wise is going to impact what kind of a scholarship you get, we're basically discouraging the kid from taking 3 AP classes instead of 1 or 2. And I don't think we want to do that. So others, John.
So I don't mean to sidetrack us or derail this conversation. And I don't feel like I'm going to speak very eloquently about this, but I feel like as a school board, in the time that I have been observing our school board and then now acting on our school board, I have a serious concern that we spend most of our time when we're talking about curriculum and when, for instance, tonight, grading practices, that we focus a lot on policies that are going to affect the very top achievers in our school district. I don't feel like we're focusing very much on those students who are struggling in our school district, especially when just in the tone that we've been discussing the retake policy, for instance. It feels like a policy that is targeted at students who might need more opportunity or be willing to go out of their way to put more effort into their schoolwork when maybe they have not been as successful as they would have desired or their families would have desired. Yet the tone of almost everything that we're speaking about is targeted at ensuring that the students who are likely going to be successful, going on to college, and have most opportunities to do their best already, will be doing very well. I'm not saying that these aren't valuable discussions, and I'm not saying that these aren't policies that we should be considering, but as a school board, I know that we do and have for, or in any time that we compare ourselves to private schools, for instance, or to voucher schools or anything like that. We go out of our way to remind our community that as a public school system, we accept every kid. We try to educate every kid, and it doesn't matter how high achieving or low achieving they are when they come into our hands. By the time they get out of our hands, we do our best to make sure that they are better educated. And I'm just a little disappointed that the tone of our conversations for at least the last 6 months, 7 months that I've been paying very close attention seem to focus really heavily on students who it feels like are going to do pretty well already, and maybe not as much as I would prefer on students who probably need a little bit more help. So.
Well, I'll just respond very briefly to that. I would disagree. And I've been on the school board for about 7 years now, and I can tell you that I think we have worked very hard to address the needs of the entire spectrum of our students, those that probably are going to go on to, become medical doctors, and those who will do something other than college when they leave high school, and everybody in between. I have always had the philosophy that what our schools should do is give every student the opportunity to learn as much as they possibly can. And that's all I'm talking about with respect to what I was just saying before. We don't want to discourage kids from learning as much as they can. And again, most of our students will go on to college, and if we have a grading policy at the high school that has a tendency to begin to discourage kids from learning as much as they possibly can so that they can get a 4.0 or a 3.8 or whatever, I think we do them a disservice. But I do think that if you've been on the board for any length of time or watched the meetings for any length of time, I think you'd have to acknowledge, as Judy did just tonight, yeah, we're really concerned about how everybody does. And, you know, going back to this topic number 2, you know, how are equity and social justice represented in our grading practices? It's not like we don't talk about this or think about it. We do. But we have to think about and talk about all of our students as well.
Could Tim share anything? I mean, because you live this every day. I mean, can you give us some examples of what we do for students who are not in the high achieving section?
We look at putting supports in for our students, but we also need to help the students so they don't become so discouraged that they give up. And that's a real legitimate fear. And so there's kind of that balance act. And I'll admit, I think we got to do a better job in some instances. We've tried, at the high school, we've tried academic homerooms, where students in 9th and 10th grade are placed in a homeroom setting for extra support if they need it. We've worked with having, I'm forgetting the term we use because everybody uses a different term, but we have math teachers and we have English teachers available throughout the day for students who can see during the study hall, before school, after school, for extra help. We tried to give the extra supports were needed. We believe in full inclusion of our students with disabilities, fully included into our classrooms whenever possible, because we know that pulling them in isolation isn't in their best interest, and it's also not in the rest of the students' best interest as well. But I think we need to do a better job of, and as John said, of disaggregating the data, and we do, but we need to do a better job of looking at what does that data tell us, and what does the gap tell us, and what are we doing for extra supports, whether it is disaggregated by race, whether it's disaggregated by disability, by gender, by all these other factors. I think we need to do a better job and have some more honest discussions of owning our data and accepting what is good, but also accepting what doesn't look good, and figuring out how do we as a system move forward, and how do we as a system meet the needs of the students. And I have 2 students that are on different spectrums, that have different interests, that have different abilities and shine in different areas. And how do we recognize both of them? How do we take, my 2 kids are different. How do we recognize their differences? Well, how do we embrace their strengths, regardless whether it's academic? Because there are students that excel academics, but there are also students who excel in other areas. They excel in maybe the problem solving, in the creativity, in the socialization, in the empathy, in the other skills, and how do we value those skills? And so as administration, we've started the conversation, and we're starting the conversation with staff. Some people call them 21st century skills, but we're in the 21st century, so it's hard for me to say 21st century skills. Some people call them soft skills, but to me they're not soft skills. But how do we reinforce and how do we teach those skills? How do we teach flexibility? And how do we model flexibility as a system? How do we teach and model adaptability? How do we do problem solving? How do we do creative thinking? How do we do all those things that every employer that I've talked to said these are the skills we value? These are the skills we value in our employees. Well, how do we help prepare our students? And you hear me say, hopefully you've heard me say this, but I'm saying it more and more often, how do we prepare students for their future, not our past? Because they're going to an emerging world. They're going to careers and things that that don't exist yet. How do we prepare them for that? And those are conversations we're having. I wish I wish I had the answer. I wish I had the golden ticket, because I'd be in the talk circuit right now, telling everybody else what to do. But those are conversations we are starting to have, we are continuing to have, and they're tough conversations. And I think that's, as you know, administration, as the board, as everybody, we need to learn and grow together and figure out, how do we do this? You know, so John, how do we make sure that when, you know, your child enters kindergarten, that we're on the right track, and when they graduate, they're prepared, because the world is gonna look different 18 years from now than it does now. So how do we become a system that's adaptable enough and flexible enough that we're meeting the needs then, as, you know, we're working?
But Tim, you're not, with all due respect, I mean, you're not touting some things that I think you definitely should be, because since you've come here, you have implemented them. We're doing innovation grants.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time at different schools learning about all the different things they're doing that help people's learning. And it's not directed at high achievers, it's directed at all students. There's people at, you know, teachers at Kegonsa that are doing play-based stuff that we want to try to roll out to everybody. We're at Fox Prairie, where they're doing some amazing stuff in the 5th grade level with personalized learning. Our graduation rate has not gone down, it's gone up since you came. There were times, I mean, before you came, my kids were in high school, I know what we were looking at. More children are participating in extracurricular activities than ever before. That means that they're engaged. We know an engaged student is a student that's going to be more successful. That's just, studies prove that. There's many things we can look at that point that we are doing the right things, and that we're not just focusing on a certain group of children. I mean, the fact that we are an all-inclusive district, we've been touted for that. We were studied
Nationally
for this.
recognized as
So,
such.
I mean, to the point where people were, you know, some people actually complained about it because they felt like there was a certain segment of the population, of our student population, that was not getting services because they didn't need anything. So I think that we need to kind of look at it over a large time frame, more than just the past 6 months. And I think that those things, you know, when we get to talk about them more, I mean, we talk about data every year, we look at that. I mean, there'll be many opportunities to learn more about what we're doing as a district, but that doesn't mean we can't do more. And I think that's what this conversation is about. But I don't think that we should say that we're only focusing on a certain group.
I would like to clarify that to Tim and Judy, especially since the two of you are here representing the school district. My concern was in no way a response to the school district's performance or the information that you guys have presented to us. My concern was only a reflection on how we as a school board are consuming the information that you guys are presenting to us. So I think you guys are doing a fantastic job, and I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate all of the professionals who give their entire lives to make sure that our kids are learning. So I don't believe that this is, or I don't believe that in any way the school district is falling short in terms of the way that you guys are educating our kids. So I hope I can be clear on that.
What we're coming to you with, and what our ongoing goal is to find that balance for all kids. Mm-hmm. And it really probably isn't exactly the same for everyone. Mm-hmm. And if we can stretch a little bit to not do things exactly the same for everyone, which is also a challenge, because what you got, I want also, whether it is appropriate for me or not. So there's some balance in that as well. We believe that the more the more involved students are in their own learning, we want them to be able to articulate what they need to reach their goals. And then we can accommodate, modify, differentiate for that. So I am very much hearing the whole range of what we want for all of our kids. I think one of our challenges is to make sure that we don't implement one thing for everyone and hope that it will be just right for all of them, because it will only be right for one. And then there'll be the others, yeah.
Are there there other questions, comments, Yoli?
Oh, well, I would just, going to say it's just that John Broly, when we were talking about the retake and things like that, is because most of all have kids in the school, and that I particularly as a mom feel the same way as Donna and Scott, that we're not preparing them for real life. And of course, we are privileged in terms of we don't have any economical disadvantage or anything. And then we are thinking, we're also professional, we are thinking about what our kids are gonna be doing in the future too. But I think that we always trying to see that how all of our students are doing. One of the things that came out from those conversations was the poverty task force, for example. So, and then we're trying to do all that for those families that are in economic disadvantage right now. So I think sometimes the conversation may seem like it's like that, but I think that we are trying really hard in putting all the kids in the same advantage, if I can say that way, or trying to do everything for all the kids. I think it probably is something that we have failed is in giving or being able to give all the opportunities to those children that are economically disadvantaged, or for children with learning disability or mental disability, and the diversity of our teachers, for example, that we don't have that diversity, and then like Donna was saying about Madison School District, that is a big thing that we need to be doing here, because we don't have diversity in our schools and in terms of teachers. Those are things that probably we have, I wouldn't say failed, but it's still going. It's something that we have to be, on top to be able to teach all of our kids the same way. That's my opinion.
So I understand all this talk about preparing our students for real life, and I agree with some of that, but certainly at the middle school level and on the early high school level, they're not in real life at this point. I think what we need to be focused on during those years is learning and the joy of learning. And I think if you give a kid a test, particularly a kid, and I have a kid who has a hard time in school, particularly a kid like that, you give them the test and say, well, there's your grade, that door's shut. I don't think that fosters a joy of learning. I think if you say to that kid, okay, here's your grade, do you think you could do better? Let's work on it. And you give that kid an opportunity to do that, he's going to enjoy learning, or he's at least going to have the potential to enjoy learning. So I think, there's probably is a case to be made for phasing this out, but I just have a real problem when we're talking about young kids and real life, because a 12-year-old kid's not in real life. And part of our job is to make them curious. So.
Tim and then Alice.
Yeah, I think this is a really good conversation. I would echo everything that's said. I think this is a process, as I said before. I think it feels like you're on the right track. I think of this in terms of, and I've had this discussion with some folks, is we want all students to get to this certain place, and they're starting maybe in different spots, and the path that they use to get there might need to look a little different. And I do think part of our role as educators, as a board, is to create systems and structures that allow that to happen. I'm kind of against a sort of blanket policy that says no retakes. If we're going to go there, I think that you have to certainly have a certain level of discretion, or allow the educators, the teachers to have a certain level of discretion to determine what might need to happen for a certain student to have a path to get to those high expectations that another student might need. I agree, Joe. We're preparing them for real life. I left high school, and I think I got a pretty good education. I wasn't ready for real life. That's a process. And so, that sort of response never really worked with me, that we're getting them ready for real life. They don't know what real life, some of us don't know what real life is yet as adults. It's sort of So I think we have to always be careful. Well, this in the real world, this is how it's going to be. Well, in a decade or two, the real world's going to probably look very, very different than it does right now. So I just want to encourage us to continue to have these conversations, because I think that this is an infinite challenge, and we're not going to have all the solutions. The only thing I'm going to say is, you study the history of education, we still operate under this industrial model, this factory model. And to me, if I could do it, I would get rid of grading altogether. Because if you really think about it, if everybody left Stoughton High School with a 4.0, it wouldn't be looked at as, wow, that's a really great district. It would be looked at, well, that must be a district that has real low expectations. So there almost needs to be this system in place where some students do better than others. And I know it's not realistic to get rid of grading, but I think that, you know, I've said what I need to say. I think this is a good discussion, and I'm really encouraged by the work you're doing, and I would just continue to move forward and let us know how we can support it. Alice?
Just so many things everyone has said that I agree with, that resonate. One of the things that Joe was saying is, especially in the middle school era, they're really kind of learning this system. They are learning how to learn, and I think, again, just taking away the retake option is, and I don't think anyone's talking about that, but a blanket policy, like you were saying, is really probably not a good idea. The question is, where do we start making that change? And there is no one-size-fits-all thing. I mean, there's nothing we're going to come up with that is going to be absolutely perfect for every single kid. If we're going to expect, the workforce, what they're looking for, as Tim said, is flexibility and adaptability. We also have to be flexible and adaptable in whatever model we come up with, or I don't think it's going to work. Have we kind of looked at what other economies or other nations, other communities do? Because, and I'm sure there's a lot of research out there. I haven't seen that, and I'm sure you've looked at it and know what's there. But if there are other things to compare it to, if we look at some of the families that are homeschooling, they don't have grades, and their kids are doing just fine getting into school. And so on that level, I agree with what Tim is saying, is I would love to just see grades go away. But, we have to have something in place to measure. So I don't know if that's possible.
And we do things, we've already done things like, unless the college particularly asks for it, we don't report class rank when we send the transcripts for our students. Because what we have found is some colleges, like Madison, their first screening is the top 25%. And so if you're not in the top 25%, they don't look any further. And what us and other school districts have found is, if we don't report your class rank, they are forced to go deeper and look at your whole portfolio and take you as a whole instead of that class rank. So we do things like that already, where we want the colleges to assess the entire child. What did you do in the breadth of your, primarily they look at high school, but what did you do? What were you involved in? What classes were you in? What does your essay say? Those other factors that it may be a truer picture of the student than that arbitrary number where, I think about when I first started teaching, and I taught in northern Wisconsin, and there was a little tiny district near us who had a graduating class of 4. Okay? Well, the 4th person could do one of 2 things. I was 4th in my class. If you don't tell you there's 4 kids, wow, it's pretty impressive. Or I was last in my class. There's only 4 kids. So you can make it mean anything you want. So it's an arbitrary number in some regards. And so we've already made that switch 4 or 5 years ago, I think it's been already, that we stopped reporting class rank to the colleges.
Other questions or comments, Joe?
So, Judy, what are you asking
for the board to do, and what's the timeline for doing that?
I mostly was wanting you to know the 3 topics that we will continue to study. I'll come back, talk again. If there is a 4th topic, and I have sort of a sense for some a research base and some information about our gap information, and that some data may also help us see our whole spectrum of a student population. I think that our transcripts speak to colleges, like whether it's a 5-point or a 4-point, the transcript, the courses that you took speak to colleges. Part of this is a scholarship situation where our top 2-3 students earn a scholarship, the top scholarship from the state of Wisconsin. So that is a piece of this that is separate from transcripts and is separate from a GPA. And I think another important piece that I'm also hearing is the preparation for post-secondary work. That have we inadvertently, with some of our practices, not prepared kids for post-secondary, the rigor of post-secondary work, where you take one test at the end of the semester and you either pass or you fail. I'm not sure I'm ready to do that to the kids yet, but that I think there's some information in the last, since the last time 10 years ago when we were doing surveys and trying to improve our practices, it's probably time to seek information about that as well from our community, from you guys, so that we're really representing what it is that the community wants. And
I don't think anyone is saying to cut, do it
no,
then.
I know, I'm not hearing that at all.
Somewhat of the same things.
I'm not hearing that at all.
We do, I think, have to prepare, because I think the higher performing school districts have college and career ready standards for their students, and we do need to think about that.
As do we. I'm going to document them for you.
Well, I guess what I was asking though, Judy, is, for example, are you asking the board to determine whether we stay with the 4-point or go to a 5-point system, or is that a determination that the administration will make and we are having a discussion?
I think I can answer that. That's getting way too far into the weeds for what a school board should be doing.
That was my question.
Yeah. If I can speak for some of us at least, and if I'm wrong, please jump in, but I think we'd like it if you could come back to us in an appropriate time, 6 months or whatever you think is appropriate. And after you've had a chance to talk to staff, especially our teaching staff, and give us kind of an update on what you're thinking. Does that sound right to people? Mm-hmm. Okay. Is that doable for you, Judy?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Very welcome. I'm
We'll
happy
see you
to.
next item.
No, not yet.
Okay.
All right, thanks, Judy. So, next discussion item, athletic tournaments as fundraisers. Erica's, that's yours, right?
Mine will be much faster. A few years ago, we started a process where annually we bring this information to the board. We use, in order to use athletic events as fundraisers, we have to have approval per the DPI. So we do this on an annual basis. Essentially what it allows us to do is when the high school athletic department hosts a basketball tournament or a volleyball tournament or like a regional type event, we have costs associated with that, but then we also receive revenues from entry fees or entrances into those events. So historically, we allowed them to treat those as fundraisers, but it had to be the excess funds that they generated had to be spent in the one fiscal year that they were generated. By having this board approval process in place, we can put it into our Fund 21, which then allows them to do multi-year planning. So they don't have to spend everything earned in 1 year in that year. So if they wanted to use some of their tournament fundraisers to purchase a piece of equipment or something like that, they can do it over a couple of years. So this will be, I think, the 3rd year that we've gone through this process, and we do it in July or August in preparation for the upcoming school year.
Other questions from anybody? I've got one. Do you have just kind of a ballpark estimate as to how much money's involved in this? I mean,
Gosh.
obviously it varies from year to year depending on playoffs and things like that.
It really does, and you know what I'll do, I'll look and see what we did last year, and I'll send that information out to the board instead of trying to come up with something off the cuff, but
But
it
it's
can.
probably well within 5 figures, right?
Oh, yeah, I would
Yeah.
say it's easily in the thousands and probably in excess of $10,000.
Okay.
Yeah, it can be. And again, it kind of depends on what types of events, the scale. I mean, like a regional basketball game is gonna probably generate more than some of the other types of events. But why don't I look and see what we did last year? And that can give you some scope of what we
Okay.
could actually generate in one given year.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, my question was around Fund 21 and the monies that go into it. And so wrestling, for example, would have an account line where it's tournament fees would go into, and et cetera, et cetera.
I think
There's an accounting measure for each group and tournament.
for each individual athletic team, I don't know that
Well,
they
maybe
do
you
it
could
by
explain.
team. I think they do it by athletics in general, so that way they can, I know in some examples, in some instances, they've used fundraiser to buy something that benefits all of the athletic department.
Okay.
It doesn't have to be necessarily specific to one team.
Okay, that's what I was curious about, how the funds are accounted for, and then how are they dispersed?
They look to, collect the funds from all the different tournaments so that they can buy, as Erica said, something that benefits the program, the athletic program, as opposed to the wrestling team or the football team.
Because otherwise, like, for example, cross-country, you don't pay to watch a cross-country meet, but
Right.
you might pay to get into a basketball game. So they try to be equitable for all
Thank
the
you.
athletes.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, so Erica, you need us to approve this at the next meeting?
Yep, and I will pull some data just to look at
Great.
about what we generate in a year for our tournaments.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Next up, an update on the compensation committee meetings work. Is that going to be Erica and Becky, or just Becky? Or?
I think, I'll take this.
Okay, good enough, thank you.
Sure. Where we're at in the Employee Relations Committee, and please, members of the Employee Relations Committee, please chime in with this. The Employee Relations Committee discussed this last week, I believe, Monday or whatever our meeting was, with an update of, if you remember, our current committee, the Compensation Committee, has been working for over a year now to try to make changes to the compensation model. And they were looking at, how do they develop a new model that meets the needs and the interest of the staff and getting feedback from the staff. They've met numerous times and spent countless hours on this, but unfortunately, I'm saddened to say that they're no further now than they were a year ago. They've kind of gone round and round with, different ideas, but as they hash out the ideas, they kind of put that on the back burner, and that really isn't feasible, and they're trying new things. So they're right now at a point where, continuing to meet, they don't have an idea to go forward with. They've kind of exhausted their ideas, etc. So the conversation was, where do we go from here? What do we do? Do we continue to have them work to come up with a new plan? Do we have them focus just on the existing plan and make it better? What do we do? They're looking for some guidance from the board as far as where do they go, what their next steps are, how do they proceed, and what is the wishes and the direction that the board wants them to proceed, because they put in countless hours, and I give those folks a lot of credit and for their due diligence and for the amount of hours they put in these discussions. but they're, right now, seems like they're spinning their wheels. They're kind of meeting and they're not getting any further as far as where they're going. And so feel free to interject and jump in, so.
All I would add is that as a committee then, through the discussion, we did have a recommendation that was to be brought to the whole board. So,
And I was,
kind of tossed the baton to Sarah.
yeah, and I was going to call on Sarah to present that recommendation from the Employee Relations Committee to the board.
It was very clear in our conversation at the committee level that as a board, we cannot begin to make suggestions when it comes to fine-grained detail about the compensation plan. That's not our role. But we can give a summons to that existing compensation committee, and they, I understand, are meeting on August 24th. And as a committee, we talked about how we would, empower them to do that fine-tuned work, to go through, line by line, all those tweaks that, raise concern or cause some dialogue, and, adjust those as needed. So, Becky has a list of those. Erica has some from participating in those endless meetings that they already have a jump start on the list. So we as a committee encourage them to continue to do that fine-tuned work. And I think on a board level, we just need to support them as they look again at the existing plan as it holds.
And if I could maybe add one thing, my recollection, and Sarah, correct me if you've got a different memory, my recollection is that the recommendation of the committee is that the compensation committee do its work on modifying the existing plan without working with Woods Consulting.
Correct. That's, yes.
And Tim, you may have the number better than I do probably, but I think we've been paying them something like $3,000-4,000 a month since we retained them about, what, a year and a half ago,
right,
something like that. And, we've spent $50,000 on this, well, more than that, and we haven't apparently gotten anywhere. So the committee's recommendation, as I understand it, is for the compensation committee to go ahead with working on improvements to modifications of the existing compensation plan, rather than doing what the Woods Group was having to do, which is essentially try to draft an entirely new plan altogether. And that's, if I understand correctly, that's where the wheels have gotten stuck in the mud, is it's just not going anywhere. Yes?
And the only thing that I would add to what I've heard is that when the committee discussed this, we felt pretty confident that as a district committee, we could look at making some changes and having this done by the end of the calendar year. So by the end of December, we would have something back to you for consideration. And we felt like we can do that leadership within our own committee.
So for tonight, this isn't up for a vote. This is up for any questions or discussion of the recommendation of the Employee Relations Committee. But they do need to get firm direction from the board before their next meeting, which was the 24th. So I plan on putting this on for a discussion action item at our next meeting. But are there any questions or comments from anybody for tonight on that? Joe?
Can you remind me what the status quo is, what we're doing now? Are we following the old plan, or are we doing?
That's what the board has approved. That's the only plan on,
So that's what
been
we're
approved
operating
on
on
record.
now.
Yes,
Yes.
that's correct.
Okay.
So I have two questions.
Steve?
Has the membership of the compensation committee changed at all, or will it change? That's one question. Number two, have we canceled the contract with Wood, or are we still engaged with them?
Well, the latter one I'll turn over to Tim, I think.
The contract with the Woods is a month-to-month contract. And so right now, we haven't done anything, we haven't canceled it, we haven't I mean, we're still proceeding, but it's a month to month.
So we're still paying them?
Yeah.
Right, and that's what would require, but one of the things that would require board approval is the termination of a contract. And then the other question was composition of the committee.
Compensation, yeah, composition of the compensation committee.
Yeah, as far as we know, unless someone would choose to remove themselves from the committee, it should be the same.
There's been a change in SEA leadership? Is
Yes,
that
but when I
represented?
talked to Katie Mullen about that, she told me she would still be the representative on the compensation committee. And the only other piece that I just wanted to add is that one of the reasons we thought this was really important to come from the board is that these educators in particular, they go back to their buildings and people are saying, what are you doing? What are you doing? What's going to change? We want something new. We have to get them off of the firing range. They need to have direction so that they're not the ones taking the heat for this. And that was one thing as a committee we just felt, and when I'm talking about committee, the ERC committee, we just felt that was really important. It was a way of kind of protecting our own staff from making a decision that they shouldn't have to own the fact that we've stalled out and this is where we're at.
Tim,
So just this Woods Consulting, so have they been involved in from the start of the creation of the plan?
We had a different consulting firm that helped come up with the original plan.
Okay.
But then when the direction was to look at the plan and figure out what to do with the plan, there was some mistrust with the original consulting firm on behalf of the staff and some of the SEA. So that's where we decided to go with a different firm. We looked at all different types of firms that could help us. The Woods were originally hired to help us with coming up with a process when we were making big changes and how to communicate that. And they were using this committee as kind of their fulfilling that as what this process is and demonstrating this process. Well, we aren't any further with a process to follow when making big changes, nor is this committee any further in making a recommendation to the entire board about what the next iteration or where the plan should be going.
You know, I think on a positive note, though, I mean, we can't fault that committee for trying every single angle they could possibly think of to come up with something that they thought was workable. And, you know, it's another thing that we talked about. If nothing else, the fact that we're full circle is just telling us something. It's just giving us information. We tried, and in this case, it's giving us information that what we've been trying isn't something that we are seeing as a committee as being any more successful or maybe even better than what we currently have.
Yeah, I would hope that nobody's interpreting this as anybody on the board saying that this was a worthless endeavor. Yeah. Certainly that's not what I'm trying to say. I agree, this was a process we had to try out.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah.
But yeah, it does tell us something.
Other questions?
I have a question about,
Go ahead.
About the plan that we have now. I remember back when it was approved and that there were going to be like surveys, the staff was going to be, the teacher were going to be surveyed about the compensation plan for the year. Do we have
They
any?
do a survey.
Yeah.
They presented that
We
to
had
us
that.
a few months ago.
Yeah.
Wasn't
They did
here?
surveys,
I'm
focus
sorry.
groups, yeah.
Okay, no, and then, never mind.
Okay.
Sorry. I
Well,
forgot about that.
Okay, well, hang
Just,
on.
mine's
Tim
more
was next.
logistical. I know we're going to, the next meeting, we have to make a decision related to Woods Consulting, and then what else specifically will the decision point be?
The recommendation is to tell the committee to go ahead with working on fixes to the existing plan rather than trying to invent a new one, which is really what they've been working on for the last year plus, is to design something new from scratch.
Okay.
And if I could just add, we also talked about we'd look at it now, but then it would also be evaluated annually.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
You know,
I'm
it isn't
sorry.
like
Thank you,
a
that's
one and done
important.
if we know it's something that's going to need continual review.
Right, right. Steve?
I was just going to suggest that maybe if you could send that link out to the committee, compensation committee's information. It wasn't.
Oh, from the Woods, that link? Or?
Whatever link had the survey information.
Oh,
Oh, it's on our website.
Yeah, I know, but it's.
We'll send that out. We'll,
Yeah,
we'll make sure that the link
I've
is
tried
sent
to
out.
find it.
Okay, but is that what you're looking? You're looking
Yes,
for the survey that the
just
Woods
to address
did?
Jolie's point of
Yeah.
the survey information, and then if I could just, I mean, I have a hard time thinking that we're going to find satisfactory fixes to the color code compensation plan. I mean, there's a lot of flaws in there, so I don't know. I mean, the work that the compensation committee did, I value that work. But you didn't start with, you started with certain things, that, right? A starting point of, we're not going to do this, this, and this. And are we in any way going back on any of those starting points?
I'm not sure, I mean, with the compensation committee, or with the compensation that we have right now, there were things in that, like no one would make less than they were currently making at the time. I'm trying to think, can you help me? Are you thinking of any other?
There was in one of your presentations, and I'll probably just have to go back and look at that. There was like a starting point. We're not going to do this, this, or this, and I don't remember what they were, but.
Well, again, I think we'd want to take all this to the committee, but the little bit that we have talked about it, it is not to go back on something that we said we wouldn't do. I mean, the things that we have just kind of thrown out casually would be items that I think would make it more attractive. We're definitely not trying to make it less attractive.
Right,
but to your point, Steve, is this going to make everybody happy?
No, I know.
No. And I don't know that there is such a plan out there, but I think we can improve on what we have.
Other questions? Okay, oh, sorry, John.
So is there, since the last time you guys updated us on the progress of the compensation plan committee, is there any sort of tangible summary that we'll be able to generate to capture the last year of talk and negotiation?
I think the last summary was what Eric and I kind of did the historic perspective, and then Lynn Wood did where she thought we were going at the time, where that was probably the best summary. We have not moved from that. All we did is we realized even what she presented, the more we talked about it and looked at it, we couldn't agree with it as a committee.
Okay. Becky, maybe if you could just go back in Neptune to, it must have been in May that we did that, I'm thinking.
Well, I can find that. If I would think
yeah,
we
your
have the
update
Woods.
and Lynn's last update, and just send us a link to that so everybody can see it between now and the next meeting.
Along with the link to the website,
Right.
which has all the meeting.
Well, it sounds like they can't get at it at the website. I think we'll just try to get that data that they gave us on the survey downloaded, so you have that.
Joe?
I think Steve's point, and if it's not, I'll make the point, is that some of us are better at navigating the website than others of us may be. So if you could get us all that, and also just the plan itself, because it sounds like we're going to have to bone up on exactly.
I'm sorry, what
the plan
was
itself.
The plan itself. I mean, you know, I've read it multiple times,
You know, that
not
was,
with the eye towards this is what we're probably going to work with, so.
I know that Eric and I, Judy as well, but we specifically offered if anyone wants to come in and sit down and really go through it, we had the opportunity to do that with a couple of you. We'd do it again, or if any of you want a refresher, if you have the time to come in, we'd be glad to do that, just to kind of demonstrate how we're hoping, how it's working today.
Yeah, I guess maybe the way to think about the decision we're going to have to make at the next meeting is, do we want to have the committee continue to try to work to invent a different compensation plan than what the board approved 2 years ago? Or do we want them to fix what we've got right now, bearing in mind that it will get reviewed periodically going forward, and we will not have the Woods work as the consultants that they've been working as, which will save us some money.
But don't need that. You don't need us to make that just that's under your purview, is that right? The Woods?
Well, no, I think we approved that contract, so if we're going to terminate it, I think we have to.
March 20th and May 1st, or when we
Okay,
have
good,
those
thank you.
things.
Any other questions or comments on that? Okay, thank you. And then Judy, we have a discussion action item regarding academic standards. I think Tim sent out an email to everybody explaining why the timing on this has had to be as hurried as it is. But I'll ask Judy to go ahead with what it is we're looking at.
Okay. We are required I think this is the third year? Second year? Third year?
Third year, but this is the first one that we discovered with the date, that
Right.
it's the date by the statute, and we discovered it by annual notices, says that the board needs to adopt the standards in its first meeting in July.
And so it asks that I inform you what standards we use to guide our work, guide our essential learning targets, our curriculum, our professional development, our assessments. And so I have those listed here with links. We use the Common Core state standards for both English language arts and mathematics. Within the English language arts, excuse me, Common Core standards, there's also a section that is disciplinary literacy and science and technology, and disciplinary literacy and history. And so there's a science piece embedded in the English and a history piece embedded in the English standards. We use the next generation standards, science standards. The social studies standards, we have the National Council of Social Studies Teachers that have made overarching standards for us. It's very difficult, interestingly, for the social studies teachers worldwide to agree on standards, which is just super ironic to me. And so we use the guidance from the Council of Social Studies Teachers. We have art, media, theater, music. All of those standards are in our national art standards. Physical ed has its own set of standards, and then we have the Wisconsin model academic standards that we use for the career and tech ed. And we have used these standards since 2012. I should probably know that.
As I understand it, we are required as a board to approve these standards for the coming school year. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. So I would excuse me, I would entertain a motion to approve these standards, and then if there's any discussion, we can discuss. So, moved by Tim. Is there a second?
Second.
From Joe. Any discussion or questions about these academic standards? Yoli.
I have a very stupid question. Because
course
I don't really know. So say we don't approve these, what is the alternative? I mean, what is the different standard? Well, I remember, I think it was last year or the year before, that we talked about having somebody, I think it was probably you, presented to us like what exactly was the Common Core and all the, I have no idea, I'm sorry.
No, that's fair enough. There are Wisconsin standards that are under review for revision. Most of our our contemporary Wisconsin standards draw on the national standards to inform the work. When we went with the Common Core standards, the Wisconsin Model Academic Standards were quite out of date. And we were pretty uncomfortable with having those drive contemporary planning. So I think to your point, it would be a problem, but not impossible. It's sort of a very long-range thing. You wouldn't change standards annually because our resources are driven by what our standards are. Everything about what we do is driven by these standards. So if there are, things about these standards that you want to know more about, or you might be uncomfortable with, or any of those things, I'm happy to speak to those so that you feel a little bit more confident about them, which I would totally get. But it probably, we would almost need a year or more to anticipate that kind of change, so that we were looking to different resources potentially to guide our work. That said, the Wisconsin Model Academic Standards in English and math are updated. Draw from Common Core, but are not Common Core. So
there are schools out there that they use the Wisconsin academic standards, or?
That's a good question. I don't know. I could probably do a query of my colleagues out there and see what they use. Well, that's a good question, though. I'd be interested in that.
Any other questions? No. Tim? Steve?
No, I don't.
Oh, I'm sorry.
About the recently adopted computer science standards. What's the timeline for us to look at that and incorporate into our own?
We have started looking at it, and so it certainly is part of our digital citizenship standards, or our digital citizenship curriculum addresses those standards, but we don't have a comprehensive embedding yet. So, but that should happen before this time next year, so I can probably amend this maybe.
And then the other question would be, DPI just recently had a hearing on the ESSA, which is more like the federal actions, which is the replacement for No Child Left Behind. Does that have any bearing on anything that we're doing or have adopted?
It does, but not on our standards. That includes Title I, Title II, Title III, IDEA. So those kinds. So it has a lot of bearing. It's a funding resource for us as well, but it doesn't drive our standards.
Steve?
So to Donna's question, did I understand that we're going to update this to include the computer science standard?
Right.
Okay.
They were adopted
just recently,
yeah.
this
a week
past
ago.
week.
And then a somewhat related question. The IT literacy, music, and science standards are being rewritten. Do we comment on those? Will we as a district comment, or review them and comment?
You may, as the state revises them, there's an open comment period.
It's
So,
30 days, so they're
if-
out there apparently, and we...
So if I can get you the link, if you're interested, the music ones are available right now, and technology, and one more.
Will that affect this list if they get approved soon?
No, it won't affect this list, no. It could be that we would go to the Wisconsin Model Academic Standards for music instead of the National Core, which I can take that to the music staff. We usually have the people who are the content experts are the ones that kind of make those decisions and make recommendations.
So as a district, if there was an issue or a question about a standard, they would review it and we might comment.
Right.
Okay. And I guess the last thing was just that link for the career technology education standards goes to their publication page, so you can't really...
You can buy them if you want.
Yeah, I know you can buy them.
I can buy them for you also so that you can
No, I
actually
was
look
just
into them.
curious. I was looking at the others, so, okay.
Right. It's
Can I just clarify? I mean, I thought that the council just recommended that they rewrite the music IT and that it wasn't a mandate yet.
The council.
The Standards Review Council for the state superintendent recommended the state superintendent pursue a formal rewrite of the state's music, science, and information.
I thought I read that music was available for review. I will check on that for you.
This was as of July 13th, so
yeah, they probably haven't done anything since then. You're
Okay.
probably right.
Others, Yoli?
I'm also curious, I remember in our last meeting for the strategic plan, most people was talking about other languages being implemented in, from elementary up. Of course, I know that will be for the future, but where does other languages fall into? There is any standard? There is how do we implement that?
They have guidance standards. We don't have to approve those standards, but they should be on the list. I should have our German and Spanish target standards available for you.
And if we wanted to go that route, it will be, we'll have to, talk it here and how
But
do we implement that?
I think those are two different
things. Are you
questions. The
talking-
standard, it doesn't
Yeah.
say start education at third grade. The
right.
standard is what you're going to end up with?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, no, my question was how do we implement that?
Implement
another-
starting
a
a world
different
language at an earlier grade.
Yeah. What is the process for that?
It would be a really long process, part of which would be financial. To implement another course in all of third grade, for instance, has implications for the number of instructional minutes we have for the courses that we teach right now. Would have implications for subsequent years, fourth grade, fifth grade, and impact the languages that we teach probably at middle school. So choosing a language at elementary school would have a lot of influence on the languages that are taught at the middle school. And then having a teacher to do so, or teachers to do so, would be part of a larger financial decision, really. Is this how we're adding staff?
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Allison?
One quick thing, so just the way I understood, we're sort of skipping our two-step process here just because of the time crunch.
Right.
It needs to be by July 31st, correct?
Right.
So next year the goal would be we'd start talking about these earlier.
In June.
Yeah,
Okay.
in
Or
June.
May, or
Right.
something, yeah.
Right.
And I don't think we recognized in previous years that there was this deadline. And
Yeah.
Tim
Okay.
came across it like 2 weeks ago and realized,
Yeah.
wow, we got to get this done now. So, sorry about that. Others? Okay. There's been a motion, there's been a second. All those in favor of approving the academic standards as presented by Judy, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, and those are approved. Tim already went through a number of upcoming dates.
You have the joint meeting.
Oh,
the
gosh,
joint
thank
task
you.
force
Sorry.
with the city and
Yeah, that's really important. Okay, so last week, Thursday, we had a joint meeting between the Board of Education and the City Council. A quorum of both bodies was there, but because of our different procedural rules, no formal action could be taken by the board at that meeting because we hadn't noticed it to be for a formal motion. But what was discussed at that meeting was the formation of a joint ad hoc committee between, or comprised of, the Stoughton Area School District, Board of Education, and the City of Stoughton City Council, which would specifically work on a plan for the marketing of Stoughton as a place to live, and to develop or to encourage the development of single-family housing, and report back to both those bodies within the next 60 days. John is being appointed to chair that if it's approved tonight. The other two board members that would be on that committee would be Joe and Tim. And all that's really required tonight is for there to be a motion to approve the board's participation in such a committee, and then we can discuss it after a motion's been made. So maybe, John, you'd like to make that motion.
Yeah, I would move that we discuss the formation of an ad hoc joint committee between the City Council and the school board with the intention of marketing Stoughton as a place to live and encouraging development of single-family housing.
Well, hang on, I just want to clarify the motion. As I heard it, the motion was to discuss forming the committee. We're actually wanting to approve.
Oh, sorry, I meant to say, yeah,
okay.
Approve the formation of the committee.
Okay, and that was seconded by Allison. Any discussion or questions about that?
Just, I would really, if Tim could participate in, I don't know if we have to formally put that in there, but I think it's vital to have your participation as well. So
I was planning on being at those meetings, and I'm assuming the mayor is going to plan on being at those meetings as well, so.
Right, and there was discussion at the meeting that people from the chamber would be invited to participate in that as well.
Do we need that in the motion?
No, we don't.
I think the committee, once it's formed and they get up and running, can invite others.
Community members.
Right.
Very good.
Okay.
And part of the thinking on that is we don't want to have such a large committee that you can't get meeting dates. This is going to be 6 people, and they can invite whom they want to invite, and that's probably much more workable. So, any other questions or discussion about that?
I have a question.
Sure.
Not so much about the formation of the ad hoc committee, but in the information that was in tonight's meeting, there was information in the comprehensive plan.
Right.
There's a lot of errors about the representation of the school district.
We brought those up with the city last Thursday about, their narrative. Their narrative includes that Sandhill is a 5-6 building. Right. It includes that Martin Luther still has a school. Right. It includes that St. Anne's only goes to 6th grade when they go to 8th grade now. Yep. So yeah, we pointed those things out to them of the errors and misrepresentation in their narrative.
Yeah, and they recognized that at the meeting too.
Okay.
I'm really excited about this. This was one of the things that I hoped would come out of setting up these joint meetings between the board and the city council. And most of us were at that meeting, but for those of you that weren't, I think that the impression I got is that the city council is very much in favor of making these two things happen. I had some concerns some months ago that maybe there wasn't that unanimity of direction, but I mean, I thought, those of you that were there, I think, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I think we're all kind of moving in the same direction, which is encouraging from my perspective.
Yeah, I would concur. Yeah, that was my first experience with the city council, but it felt like it was very productive and lots of goodwill intentions, and so I'm looking forward to this work.
Yeah. Other questions or comments? John?
Yeah, I guess I agree that it feels like the city council is, or recognizes, especially the concerns of the school district, that we have shrinking enrollment right now. I do get the sense that the greater Stoughton community as a whole might need some convincing that a attracting more young families really has to be a priority. So I know that it's not expressly mentioned in the 2 points that we have right now for the formation of the committee, and I'm not so concerned that it's that attracting young families isn't an immediate goal of that committee, but I think that from the school board side of this committee, I think it would be good for us to really champion that concept and try to make people aware of it and get the city council also talking about it and just get communication or get conversation started in our community to get consensus that this is a thing that we as a school district need to be healthy, but also that Stoughton as a city is going to need to be healthy.
Oh, I agree. This isn't just for the school district.
Mm-hmm.
This is for the whole community.
Yeah.
So, other questions or comments?
I just wanted to say that it was nice to hear you talking that night and say, I think I represented young families.
Yes.
That was great.
It's an easy point to make when you're the youngest person in a room like that.
All right, unless there's any further discussion, all in favor of creating such a committee with the membership that's been proposed, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, great. That's excellent. Okay, so that's the end of discussion action items. Future board meeting agenda items. August 21st will be a board development meeting. I will try to get out to you as soon as possible the things that I anticipate we will be discussing then.
First part of that meeting, for the first half hour or so, will be board docs training, which is what we are transitioning from Neptune to board docs. So the representative from board docs will take us through an exercise of just familiarizing all of us with board docs and how do we navigate through board docs.
Right.
Are we going to need to turn in our machines then and get that loaded, or?
No, we should have a link. It'll be a link on our website.
Cloud-based.
Yeah. Regular board meetings next month are August 14th and 28th. Finance next meets on August 28th, and hopefully by then we'll have a state budget to work with. Facilities next meets September 19th. Policy meets August 14 and September 5. And then board members, at this point, we do have reason to go into closed session pursuant to section 19.82 sub 1 and 19.85 sub 1 sub E to discuss board authority and compensation for the Stoughton Area School District represented and non-represented groups of staff. I would entertain a motion to go into closed session for that stated purpose.
So moved.
That was Joe. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Tim. Any discussion on that? And then we have to do this by roll call.
Mr. Bouvon?
Yes.
Mr. Coughlin?
Yes.
Mr. Fry?
Yes.
Ms. Fitzgibbon?
Yes.
Ms. Sorg?
Yes.
Ms. Tarpinian?
Yes.
Who did I miss? My order's not right here. Ms.
Rob?
Rupp?
Yes.
Mr. Jackson?
Yes.
And President Dirk?
Yes. All right, thank you. Let's meet upstairs at 20 minutes after. So that's 7 minutes for whatever break you need, whether you need it or not.